Hey guys, I'm Chris back and a very warm welcome to Fretworks. This week's video, in a roundabout way, is sort of a rehash of an older video that I did going back about 2 years ago, addressing at that particular point in time near enough the weekly questions that I was getting in regard to what this guitar is, where I bought it, how much I paid for it, why it sounds the way it does, etc, etc. Now the purpose of that video was to hopefully try and answer those questions once and for all, but as much as they were weekly questions at the time, they've only really developed into near enough daily questions, so I thought it would make sense to rehash this video, answer some of the questions again, and provide you with some extra info that I found out about this guitar or stuff that has happened to this guitar since that previous video. So here we are again addressing the question of what is my main Strat. Now, the first thing worth mentioning about this guitar, it is a Highway 1. Now, what is a Highway 1? Highway 1 was a series of guitars that Fender made from 2002 to about 2008, 2009, depending on what you read, which, depending on what you read, is going to be quite a fitting sentence for this video, because there is quite a lot of ambiguity surrounding these guitars. Primarily, I guess, because the marketing material that would have accompanied these guitars initially predates the internet, or not predates the internet, but predates the internet as the immense tool for marketing that it is these days. So a lot of it would have been in print media form, and over years has just been lost, or the only info that I've really found out about these guitars, the only specific info that I've been able to get hold of, is actual scans of old print media. So there's a little bit of ambiguity surrounding what they are and the story behind them. Now, my understanding would have it that as much as it says made in the USA on the headstock, this guitar was probably assembled in Mexico. Now, I've read conflicting reports on this, and depending on who you read, it may actually be the other way around, but I've read more reports reaffirming what I think than I have to the contrary. American Fender parts, I should say, shipped down into Mexico via Highway 1, hence the name, and assembled in Mexico, presumably for the cheaper labour, and sent back to the US to be distributed. That would explain the cheaper price point of these guitars. They were initially retailing around about the £600 mark, so very much viewed as an entry-level US Fender, superseded by the American Special Series, the ones with the big headstocks, and now probably the American Performer, I guess, is the most recent iteration of these guitars. Either way, it's a great guitar, and to be honest, some of the best Strats I've ever played have been Mexican Strats, so I'm not picky in that respect at all. But it's just worth mentioning that is a little bit of a vague history with this guitar specifically. Now, next thing worth mentioning, I guess, is how I bought it and why I bought it. Bought this guitar probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, primarily with the sort of idea behind it being a donor guitar to develop my signature pickups. Radio Shop Pickups in South Wales had approached me to see if I was interested in doing a signature set of Crispback pickups. Needless to say, having been using Radio Shop for a few years at that point, it was an opportunity I absolutely leapt at, and we set about developing various number of prototypes. I'm a little bit of a Luddite when it comes to understanding what goes on underneath the hood, so to speak, of a guitar, so it made sense to, rather than just cannibalize anything that I did have and was comfortable with and knew it worked, just buy another guitar relatively cheaply and use that as a donor, with every intention of selling it on once I'd finished with it. For whatever reason, just the process of prototyping these pickups and using them live, going back with some suggestions, just developed a little bit of a deeper bond with this guitar than I ever thought I would do. And by the time we were finished, it just very much felt like it would make sense to keep this guitar on as my main Strat. I very much like the fact that the actual pickups in this guitar are the final prototype before any production models were made of my signature pickups, and just, as I said, on some level, there's some deep subconscious bond with this guitar, so it made sense to keep it on and use it as my main Strat, irrespective of the fact that it sounds great and I'm incredibly comfortable with how it plays. So that's the story of how I got it. In regard to any other things worth mentioning, the missing tone knob is something that I get near enough daily questions about in regard to, is it a switch I've added? Why did I take that off? How did I take it off? And I wish there was a more interesting story behind it, to be honest. The reason there's no switch, there's no extra circuitry being added, I dropped my MacBook on it. I was on tour in Spain at the time, dropped my MacBook on the guitar, and once I realised it had actually snapped the knob clean off, my only concern at the time was whether it was set to its maximum. So obviously, if it wasn't, I would have a bit of an issue, because the guitar would be dark and muffled the next time I plugged it in. Once I realised this wasn't going to be a problem, and it was on its max, resolved to replace the switch once I was home and had 5 minutes. Arrive home to gigs, teaching, YouTube videos, sessions, gets put off with the intention of maybe doing it at some point, and I've just never got around to it. And the bizarre thing is that having played countless Strats, having owned countless Strats since, I kind of struggle with the proximity of that tone position, or that tone knob, on other Strats now. I'm so used to doing volume swells with, the volume control, needless to say, on the guitar, that having that there just sort of catches on my hand, and at this point it makes perfect sense just to not really worry about having it there. I never use the bloody thing in the first place, so not really miss it. It's just one of those things that maybe I'll get around to replacing it at some point, but to be honest, my technique has kind of evolved to a point where it makes sense for it not to be there at this point, so c'est la vie. But needless to say, that's pretty much all there is to say about these guitars, or this guitar in particular. If you've seen me on YouTube, if you've seen me live, if you've seen me on Instagram, you will have heard this guitar at some point, so I thought it would be worth just readdressing some of the questions or some of the very daily sort of inquiries that I get about this guitar. So I'm going to play you out now with a couple of just different clips of this guitar being used live or being used in music videos on recordings. Hopefully just give you a better sense of what it's all about, and more importantly, how it sounds. I've been Chris Buck, this is Friday Fretworks. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next week for another video. Cheers guys, take care and see you soon.